Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everybody, welcome today. I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm in for Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts webinar series. I want to welcome all of our listeners to Attitude, whether you're tuning in today to the live webinar, whether you're listening to the podcast version or watching the webinar replay. I think you'll find the topic of why traditional productivity tips just fall short for adults with ADHD pretty compelling. Our guest speaker and ADHD expert, Linda Walker, is going to outline strategies to help adults with ADHD get more done in less time, overcome procrastination, and ramp up your motivation. So, Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really grateful for your time. Let me introduce Linda to you. She is a trainer and a coach who has created programs for hundreds of entrepreneurs, for adults with ADHD, and other creative geniuses for the journey toward productivity. And she combines group coaching, online training, and community. She's the author of a book called With Time to Spare, The Ultimate Guide to Peak Performance for Entrepreneurs, Adults with ADHD, and Other Creative Geniuses. Visit her website. It's www.creativegeniusreport.com. And can sign up to be informed about her next free online workshops. You can get a copy of her free download, The Top 3 Creative Genius Productivity Hacks. So don't miss her website, creativegeniusreport.com. A few notes before Linda starts her slides. She will be presenting her slides, and then we will take questions. So have your questions ready. You can post them anytime in the question box. If you're a podcast listener, you might want to visit the webinar replay page on attitudemag.com. You'll search for the Walker webinar. You'll be able to access the slides that will accompany this presentation. And for those of you who are interested in an attendance certificate, please wait until the very end of the presentation. Look for the questions marked Request for Certificate in both the live and the replay version. Complete the questions and you'll receive a certificate via email. So with no further ado, let me turn this over to Linda with our thanks again and welcome to Attitude.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for showing up, everyone. As you know, I have been coaching people with ADHD for quite some years now. I am the wife of a man with ADHD, a raving ADHDer, and I would say a poster child for ADHD. And I have a daughter, my youngest daughter, who is now in her early 30s, who also has attention deficit disorder. So we are a family of ADHDers. And while I've taken a lot of training, I've also had the training in the School of Hard Knocks. So I'm really happy to be here to be able to offer this. The objectives, basically, we're going to look at what are some of the possible strategies that you can use, hacks that you can use, using your brain to really influence your productivity. So let's get started. So first thing, before we get started, let's find out what are some of the things that affect your productivity. First, motivation. I think it's really important that you start with wanting something. If you don't want to go anywhere, there's no place to go. A little bit like the Cheshire Cat. If you don't know where you're going, anywhere is good. So that will affect your productivity. And with motivation, belief as well. If you don't believe that you can actually achieve a particular outcome, you're not going to be able to be very productive. Another thing that comes up after that is to set an intention. Setting an intention is kind of investing in your vision of what you want. It kind of awakens the filter in your mind. And I'll be talking about this filter that's really, really a cool filter that once you understand it, you can open up a window of opportunities to use it for many, many good things. And once you've identified an intention, you need to take meaningful action by starting with a plan. You need to determine what do you need to do to get from point A, which is where you are, to point B, which is what you want to do. Of course, you need to pay attention to what you pay attention to, because unfortunately, that filter it can be helpful in your drive towards what you want to achieve, but it could also be to your detriment if you focus on the wrong things. And then finally, you want to make sure that you deploy action or energy to take action. Let me go. So one of the really key things about anybody. We are all motivated by dopamine. ADHDers are motivated by their dopamine hits. And here's why. First of all, let me talk about the dopamine system. Dopamine system includes your dopamine transporters and receptors. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that has been coined as the motivation molecule. It's a really important molecule. It's heavily involved in motivation, in focus and attention span, in follow through and taking action, in reward and pleasure. And this is an important thing to understand, because in ADHDers, dopamine seems to be an issue. Scientific literature suggests that ADHD is affected by the brain's by dopamine. What we know is that it seems to be a challenge with especially lower levels of dopamine transporters. So dopamine goes from one cell to another, but it's transported to receptors. If the transporters, if there aren't enough transporters, it takes longer for information to get through, and sometimes the information gets lost. And it seems to be especially in the left hemisphere of the brain. Now, some research even suggests that ADHD might be a reward deficiency syndrome. And this means that it takes so much more for you to really feel the same reward or the same pleasure as other people. And it explains why a lot of ADHDers are also have a tendency to be addicted to certain types of things. Maybe it's the internet, maybe it's social media, maybe it's drugs or alcohol, or even sex for that matter. You don't derive pleasure from your accomplishments because you have a tendency to focus on the things that didn't go well. I saw a post actually on Totally ADD. Rick Green was talking about the same situation where even after he would do a stand-up gig or anything, even if it was amazing and people were cheering him on, he always came back with the idea that, oh, there's this that went wrong and that didn't go so well and I didn't do this right. And that's a tendency for people with ADHD. Everything that you've left undone comes up as well. It's not done, so it's not finished. You downplay your strengths and you tend to downplay your accomplishments. And of course, your weaknesses are more noticeable as a result. And this erodes your motivation. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle. Now, one of the really interesting thing is that ADHDers do really, really well because your brain is ignited by interest. So you do well when a task is really, really interesting to you. If it isn't interesting, well, we're going to have some challenges, of course. It could be a novel task, something that you've never done before, and it's piquing your interest. It could also be a task that's challenging or competitive. Now, competitive, not so much if you are a very anxious person, but definitely interesting tasks or novel tasks, challenging tasks tend to ignite your brain. And so you don't really have an issue with getting those things done. People who are ADHDers who are interested in something don't have any challenges. Now, unfortunately, when tasks are really challenging for you, and they're not interesting, they're not novel, they don't present a challenge or a competition or competitive behavior, you have a tendency to use urgency. And when you do that, you use the neurotransmitter adrenaline instead of your dopamine. Now, the reason why interesting, novel, and challenging tasks are not difficult for you is because doing the task itself is the reward. So you're getting a dopamine hit. You are satisfying your need for dopamine in that particular moment. And that's why those tasks never cause you any sort of challenges normally. Now, so knowing that, let's look at the first hack. So you want to, as much as possible, do tasks that you're good at, that play to your strengths, that interest you, and so on. But unfortunately, the world is the way it is. We unfortunately do have to do some tasks that may be more challenging. So let's redesign those problem tasks to make them dopamine hit worthy. So as an example, you could create interest. Now, here's a really cool idea. My husband is a creative genius. By the way, that's the term I use to define people with ADHD. I find it's a much more empowering term. And there's been some studies that show that ADHDers tend to be more creative than most people. So one of the interesting things that my husband does is that he always leaves every place that he has been in intact. Like it's always clean. It drives me crazy because although I'm supposed to be neurotypical, I am not like that. I'm a little bit the disorganized person. And I asked him, like, how do you stay interested in keeping your space clean? You leave the kitchen, you'd never know you were there. He says, well, I play a game with myself. I pretend that I'm a spy and that I have to make sure that nobody knew I was here. So he makes sure that everything is cleared. So that's a really cool way of redesigning a problem task, like cleaning. You can make the task more winnable. You could make it so that it's shorter, smaller baby steps. And what that means, how that would look like is this. Instead of cleaning your whole office, I've been in a office cleaning mode in the last few weeks, let's say. Instead of doing your whole office, you can maybe clean your desk if it's not too bad, or you can clean a section of your desk, or you can clean a pile or an inch out of a pile of papers. So that's what we mean by, instead of taking this big chunk, it's a lot easier to make it into a baby step. It can also mean, instead of writing a book, sitting down and saying, okay, today I'm going to write a book. I've written a book and it isn't that easy. So you really do have to determine, okay, well, let's break it down even smaller. Today I'm going to sit down and determine what are the chapters that I'm going to have in my book. And the next day you might decide, well, what's going to be in chapter 1? And then the next day you might just write the intro. So all of these are small steps. And what they do is two things. Number one is they make it a lot less scary to do that task. But the second thing that they do that's really, really cool is they give you very quick dopamine hits. So you get the dopamine hit that you need. The next step is, of course, you can use competition. You can use a timer to determine, okay, I'm going to see how many papers I could get through, or how fast I can get this particular report done. That's one way of doing it. And you could set your timer for 15, 20, 30 minutes, whatever. Or you could do, some of you may have heard of the Pomodoro technique. Pomodoro technique says, well, work for 25 minutes, or you set a timer for 25 minutes and take a break for 5. So I'm good with that, and I'm not so good with that. I don't think the idea of dictating how much time you get to spend on a particular task is up to somebody else. You need to determine, is 15 minutes enough or too much or not enough? Is 30 minutes too much? So you determine how long you want to spend on a task, and then you take a break, 5 or 10 minutes, and you set a timer for the break as well. One extra thing that I would do is I would turn around or during that break, I would think of, okay, what did I get done just now? What progress did I just make? And in doing that, bang, dopamine hit again. So competition is a great way if you're using, and a lot of people use this approach. You can create novelty. You can make it into something that's a new task or seeming like a new task, like doing it somewhere. I like to study in the Starbucks near my house. There's a huge table. Everybody studies, all the students. I'm close to 2 colleges. All the students are studying. Nobody knows each other, but because we're all there at the same time, we're using body doubles. But creating that novelty is another way of hitting the dopamine where you need it. So the next step. So we've dealt with the motivation. Now let's look at the gap, that implementation gap. Russell Ramsey at the last conference, the last ADHD or International ADHD conference, was saying, and in his book says that ADHD is an implementation problem, a problem efficiently organizing and carrying out viable actions toward desired, viable, but deferred goals. And that is definitely true. I don't know how many times people have asked me, what do I do with this implementation gap? And I totally get it. It's really an incredible challenge. So what can you do? let's look at a hack. You can go from wish to possibility. And you do that by determining when, where, and how. So you're using intention, but you're being more precise. The more precise you are with what you want to achieve, the more likely you are to do it. And there's been some studies with positive psychology. Positive psychology is a branch of psychology that studies what works instead of what's not working. And they look at, okay, success stories, what has happened, or they'll test how people are doing in certain factors, with certain factors. So they found that when people determine when, where, and how they're going to do something, in other words, they're a lot more precise about the achievement of that goal, they double their chances of achieving it. Now, that's why in coaching, when my clients say, here's the plan of action that we want to achieve, I'll go, okay, so that's the plan of action. So you want to get this done by the next time we meet. Perfect. Where are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? How are you going to get it? How are you going to get started, especially? And is it written in your agenda? Because I strongly believe in the idea of using an agenda. Unless you have a life that's really, really simple and it's just getting up in the morning. And you wouldn't be here if that was the kind of life you had. So that's hack number 2. Then we want to, if you remember, we want to start taking meaningful steps toward our goals. So achieving our goals require that we first know what our desired future is going to be. Clicking on the wrong thing. Okay, there we go. So it requires us to know where we want to be, have a clear goal. For example, you might want to go to France. Okay, so that's a wish right now. It's just a wish. It's this is where I want to go. This is what I want to do. Maybe it's write a book. Maybe it's play the guitar, be able to be amazing at playing the guitar. Then you have to determine, where are you right now? Well, I have my arrows are in my quiver, or I'm not even sure if that's what it's called, but I need to take out an arrow. There's things that I need to do. My current situation, my current reality is I don't have any money to go to France. I don't have any time to go to France. I may not have a valid passport, and I may have a pet that I have to find somebody to take care of. So that's the current reality, and that's something that most ADHDers miss. ADHDers are big dreamers. They often are big dreamers, and they have big dreams. They're big picture thinkers, but they really struggle with making things happen because they don't look at their current reality to determine what are the next steps that need to happen. What plan do they need to elaborate to make it happen? So my husband and I, when for our 25th anniversary, we had decided a few years earlier that we wanted to go to Italy. And we were planning on going for 2 or 3 weeks. We ended up going for a month. But the way we did it was we set up automated savings, because if you don't have any money right now, you don't have any money saved up, well, maybe you need to set up an automated savings account, set it up so that every pay, so much money goes towards your trip. We also started systems of organizing the household so that when we leave, everything doesn't go into shambles. If I was in my own business, or if I work for somebody else, I want to make sure that maybe I need to plan some systems if I'm too busy, so that when I leave, everything continues to run smoothly. So, and maybe there's things that I need to do. So I might need to prepare a list of the things that I need to do to make it happen. So to do that requires a huge amount of self-regulation strategies. And that is something that is in poor supply with adults with ADHD. So we need to hack this process. So one way to hack this process, your brain's challenges with self-regulation, is to give a big whoop. And here's what a whoop is. So it starts with W, that wish that we talked about, the motivation. What is it that you want to achieve? Then it looks at outcomes. What and why it matters. So for me, if you were looking at going to France, for example, well, you might want to go to Paris to visit, to go and see all of the museums. There's an awful lot of art, and try out the culture and maybe drink a little bit of wine like I would. And the reason why it matters, you're going, let's say, with your spouse, and you want to have some meaningful, exploring and sharing really amazing things with your spouse. I know my trip to Italy, my husband and I had an amazing trip together. So that's giving a big whoop. It's determining the wish and then determining what about that wish do we want. I don't want to go in the winter. I don't want to go when it's incredibly hot. So I might want to go at certain times in the year. And I might want to go in 2021, for example. The next step is, of course, determining your current situation. So what are the obstacles and what are the gaps? So obstacles and gaps, to determine what your obstacles and gaps are, of course, as I mentioned before, I don't have any time or money, or I don't have a passport and whatever. So identifying those obstacles will help you do the next step, and that's really to put in place a plan. And you could put in place a plan using if-then statements. If this particular obstacle happens, I will use this solution. So I had an example here. So if I don't currently have the money, well, then I will deposit, let's say, $200 per pay automatically into an account so that I don't see that money. I don't spend that money. That's an if-then statement. If-then statements can be used with all kinds of issues. If you're having problems, let's say, as an example, you're trying to achieve a particular goal. You need to prepare a report, but people are always disturbing you. While they're not disturbing you, while you're thinking about it, while you're planning, you say, okay, well, I know that the tendency is for people to come into my office unannounced. Okay. And recognize that the challenges or the obstacles that have stopped you in the past from achieving what you want to achieve are almost always the same obstacles that keep on coming back until you create an if-then statement. So let's say that's my challenge. I have people who show up at my door. I was planning to study, or I was planning to work on a particular report. So shows up at my door. If this person shows up, or anybody shows up at my door, I will time out. Whoa, stop. I would love to talk to you, but right now I need to focus on something. So I might need to create a script. I might need to prepare how I'm going to tell them in a nice way that I can't be involved with them right now. I can't help them with whatever it is that they have. Because a lot of people with ADHD will drop everything to solve somebody else's problem. So time out. I'm sorry. I can't work on that right now. I need to focus on what I'm doing right now. Or if you're at home, well, I had planned to do something. It's really important to me. Can we meet at such and such a time? So you set up a meeting and you put it in your agenda and you make sure you show up. So that's an if-then statement that you could use to finally do that last P, of giving a big whoop. Next is, one thing that's really important is that what you pay attention to grows. Now, your particular performance at work and in your life could be something that looks like this. But because ADHDers have a tendency to pay attention to everything that they haven't completed, and you really struggle with completing those last little details of projects and so on, that's all you see. Or every mistake has been pointed out so many times. You may be doing a whole lot of things well, but what you see are the mistakes. So the red is what you do poorly. So your beliefs about your performance is that you're really flawed. You don't do very well. And why does this happen? Well, it happens because of a filter that I talked about before. You start paying attention to every mistake that you make. And so if we're able to tweak that filter, we can actually solve this issue. So let's look at how you can tweak that particular filter. Well, actually, let's look at why, first of all, you're having these types of issues. So first thing is a lifetime of failures. I mean, people, you've made mistakes, you've made inattentive mistakes and so on. You may have had, people have told you about your weakness and so on. And we have a tendency to really spend a huge amount of time fixing weaknesses instead of spending a whole lot of time on strengths. Well, all of that makes it so that at the end, you even end up discounting what you do well, and you only notice the things that you don't do so well. So what happens is the reticular activating system. Now, this is a graph I created. It's pretty busy, so I apologize for that. If you notice, about 1/3 from the bottom, there's a dotted line, a red dotted line that says RAS. That's the RAS. Above that is everything that comes in through your senses. So the reticular activating system is a gatekeeper that filters information that comes from your sight, your sense of sight, taste, hearing, and touch. It doesn't come from the sense of smell. Smell deals with another thing. But what it does is, imagine, if you will, everything that comes at you on a daily basis. Right now, you're focusing on this particular presentation, I'm hoping anyways. But around you, there's all kinds of stuff going on. I live near an airport. Well, there's airplanes flying over my head on a regular basis. I don't even notice them anymore. Why? Because I don't want to pay attention to them. My RAS has filtered them out. They still come by. There's still a lot of flights coming by, but I don't hear them anymore. In fact, it's been a challenge because when I film, I don't hear them anymore. So I end up sometimes hearing all of this noise on the film. But you're getting information from, everything that you see. There's so many things to see. Everything that you hear. So you might be in a room, and here's when your RAS is pretty interesting, is that when you could be in a crowded room, there's all kinds of people, and you're talking to someone, and all of a sudden somebody says your name, and like you couldn't hear anybody, but all of a sudden, you heard your name. That's your RAS, your reticular activating system that says, hey, somebody just mentioned your name. Listen up. What are they saying about you? That's a tendency. Or you're doing something and something starts hurting. Let's say you feel something on your hand and you look and it's a mosquito. Certainly not at this time of the year. I'm in Canada, so we're covered in snow. There's no mosquitoes. But your reticular activating system also alerts you when there's some danger. Not a huge danger, but when you're in harm's way. So it takes all of this information that's going on that stays in your unconscious mind, and it filters only what you want to pay attention to. Of course, it filters any danger, any physical danger. It filters things like your name, but it also filters anything that you focus on. So if I'm focusing only on what I have done wrong, if all I focus on is my mistakes and so on, that's all that I'm going to see. Everything is going to be filtered out. Now, the RAS can be used in a number of different ways to actually help you. One way, if you notice here on the right, it's you have a goal. Well, if you're very clear on your goal, if your intention is very clear, your reticular activating system will help you identify, take opportunities and so on to move towards that. So, for example, have you ever come to a point where, let's say you need a car, you need to buy a car, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, I think what do we want? You've done all the research. We want a Toyota Matrix. Now, you've never seen a Toyota Matrix, or you've seen them once or twice, but all of a sudden you go outside and the next thing you know, there are Toyota Matrices everywhere, or matrices everywhere. Why? Because it became conscious for you that that's what you're looking for. And so your reticular activating system filters all of the Toyota Matrix cars that it sees. If, for example, you decide to focus on what's going well in your life, that's what you're going to see most of. So here's how you can tweak your reticular activating system. So to take advantage of it, there's a lot of ways, by the way. But the one first way that I always get my clients to do, just that I don't get them to do, but certainly I challenge them to do, is to use a success journal. Why the success journal? Well, here's what happens. When you use a success journal, you are noticing the things that you did well. And it doesn't have to be earth shattering. It could be good deeds. Maybe you helped somebody. Small thing. Maybe you paid, somebody was looking for change to pay for something and you just paid it for them. Well, that's something that should go in your success journal. You got to work on time today when you're normally late, or even you got to work on time 5 minutes earlier than usual. Well, that's something to celebrate. So by challenging yourself every day to find at least 5 things to add to your success journal, what happens is that all of a sudden that's what you're looking for. Your reticular activating system filters that through. And so you become, you get to the point where you can more easily notice all of these things that you're doing well. Now, another way that you can tweak your reticular activating system is by using a gratitude journal. Now, we all have things that go well, and we all have things that don't go so well in our lives. I could tell you that when my husband and I were first married, and for the first 15 years, life was really tough. His ADD was really challenging. We had financial problems. His job was always on the line because he would just blurt whatever, or he'd quit a job and so on before he had another one. So it made life really, really overwhelming for me. I had to deal with that, and I had 2 little kids, and I was afraid for my kids that we'd end up on the streets or something. So all I could see was all of these problems. If the car broke down, it was the end of the world because we had no money. We were deep in debt. So that's what I noticed. All the things that were going wrong in my life until somebody got me into looking at what I could be grateful for. And I started noticing the things that I could be grateful for. There's so much. I live in Canada. I live in a country where I don't have to fear that I'm going to be bombed at any moment. I know in the US, some people might say, well, there's all these other things that have happened. But in general, you don't get bombed like people in Syria, for example, do. So it's something to be grateful for. I live in a country where I have an opportunity to do the things that I love to do. I do this business and I love what I do. I'm grateful we have a beautiful sunny day today in Montreal. I'm so grateful for that because sun really makes me happy. For the clarity I had this morning when I sat down and I started writing. I'm grateful for my husband's help. So looking for at least 5 things to be grateful for and trying to find at least 1 or 2 new ones every day out of those 5 will activate your reticular activating system to start filtering those things that are going well. And what that does is it improves your mood. And having a good, an improved mood has an impact on your mindset, has an impact on your motivation, and so on. So it really perpetuates itself in a big, big way. Now, there's something else I wanted to tell you about that. It's the same thing with intention. If your intention is really clear, if you're really clear about what you want to do, then your reticular activating system will filter through any opportunity that shows up. So, often we talk about the universe. I think a big part of that is the reticular activating system that's at play. You are clear on what you want in life, and all of a sudden your reticular activating system is noticing opportunities to make that happen. So it's a pretty powerful tool for anybody. So once you clear out the thinking and start having a more balanced view of your life and not seeing yourself as a flawed or broken person and seeing that you do have a lot to contribute to this world, the next step is, of course, taking action. So you need a plan. And unfortunately, most people struggle with time management. Why? ADHDers struggle with time management because traditional time management is not made for you. It's made for neurotypicals. It's too analytical. It's too one thing at a time type of thing. It's based on lists. So when that doesn't work, and you've tried many different systems, probably, when that doesn't work, what you do is you resort to planning by urgency. Whatever is the most urgent is what gets done first. And urgency could also be what comes in urgently in your inbox. It could be other people's emergencies. They didn't plan well, so now it's the monkey on your back because you're taking that on. And ADHDers have a tendency to do that. They tend to take on other people's problems. They want to be heroes. And there's a lot to be said for that. You get a lot of goodwill out of it. But also, if you're becoming a hero to everybody else, you're not getting the work that you need to get done. The next thing is, of course, you use a to-do list. And unfortunately, your to-do list becomes a to-do book. And again, you may use your email inbox. I find that that's more and more common now. Email becomes what dictates what you're going to do. For people who are rebels, who don't want other people to force them into something, you're actually giving other people the right to dictate what you do on a daily basis, which is not extremely empowering. So that's an important piece of the puzzle. You want to get away from that. Now, unfortunately, the to-do list has this big problem. It misses a whole lot of information. It doesn't tell you which of the tasks is the most pressing. I had a client, one of my first clients had 684 tasks on her list. She said every time she was an entrepreneur, every time a client cancels on me or I have some time, the time that it takes for me to get through that and try to prioritize which of the tasks that I'm going to do, the time is up. I don't have time anymore. By the time I make the decision, it's time for the next thing that I had planned. Maybe I need to meet another client or whatever. So that's an important piece. And as a result, you often struggle with prioritization. How do you prioritize when everything is a big list of things or it's a bunch of Post-its like this particular picture? So you have a tendency to multitask. You jump from one thing to the next. You're unrealistic about what's possible. Now, I had a client who came to me with 13 items on her list of things that she had to do today, one of which was painting a wall in her kid's room. She hadn't bought the paint, hadn't bought the rollers, hadn't even chosen the color of the paint. The room itself, the wall itself wasn't even prepared. How is she going to do that? And she had only 3 hours to get it done after our appointment, because when their kids came home, that was it. She couldn't do anymore. And that's along with writing a resume and applying for a bunch of jobs. And so you see what I mean, hopefully. And then finally, because all of this is happening, because you're multitasking, you don't complete a whole lot of stuff. You don't necessarily follow through. And as a result, you feel like a failure. All of these projects go undone. And that's all you can remember. Almost everything could be done except for one or two things, but it's not complete. And so it sits there and it nags you constantly that you haven't completed that particular piece. So how do you hack that? Well, you do need, and this is where time management was supposed to be first. This is where you need to plan. Okay. You need a plan. And unfortunately, time management, as I mentioned before, does not work. So what is, and I've been talking about this for, I'm thinking now 15 years. Wow. About the fact that time, it's not time that you can manage. You can't manage time. You can't bottle it up. You can't save it up for another time. Any unused time is lost. What you can do though is manage your energy. And that's becoming more and more common. I'm seeing more books about it recently. There's been some studies recently that really support the fact that managing energy is much better than managing time. So what does managing energy mean? Well, it starts with, I clicked there and I wasn't meaning to. It starts with recognizing your own natural levels of energy. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on here. I'm going to put the mouse away from the whole thing as soon as there we go. Okay. So recognizing your natural energy levels. And I determined 3 different levels. One is your genius zone. That's a period of your day when you are at peak performance. You can focus for a long time, especially if you're focusing on things that you're good at or that interest you. You can even hyper-focus during that period. That's the genius zone. Then you have periods in your day when your brain just starts churning. You can focus, but not for very long. You feel more like you need to move from one thing to another. That's the kinetic zone. You might even feel like you need to move altogether. And then the last one is the recharge zone. And that's it's periods in your day, because there's usually more than one, when you are wiped. And during your recharge zone, the tendency for North Americans, and I think for a lot of countries in Europe, is that we push through even when we're exhausted. Often right after lunch, we tend to reach that recharge zone. And when you force yourself to work through that period, what happens is that you never replenish your energy. You just keep on sapping the energy out of your system. So that's not a great thing. So understanding your natural energy levels, and then understanding the type of tasks that you should do at each level, the right level, energy level, is a very powerful way of managing your life. And then, of course, optimizing your mental energy. If you have zero mental energy because you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of your brain, that's also an issue. So those three pieces are things that you need to determine. And now I haven't done this in 2 years. It just so happened this concords with, I had offered 2 years ago a 3-part, the Focus to Freedom workshop. It's a free workshop where I talk about these. The first, of the 3 parts is on the natural, determining what your natural levels of energy are. The second one is on the identifying the types of tasks and what goes well with what. And then the last one is on optimizing that mental energy. That is coming up in March. I had planned to do it last December and things didn't happen. And so March is the go-to. So if you have questions, this is a very long topic. So if you do have questions about this, that's something that you can find out for yourself how to do that in that 3-part, Focus to Freedom workshop. So, let me see so let's recap what we've talked about. So we know that your motivation is really important. So you can hack your motivation by using dopamine hits, and you get these dopamine hits by identifying tasks that are interesting to you and doing more of that, by redesigning tasks that are challenging to make them more interesting. You want to be clear on your intentions so that you create an implementation plan, which is what, where, and when, where, and how you're going to do a particular task. And at the same time, by doing that, you're actually activating your reticular activating system. You want to also move beyond wishful thinking by creating a plan of meaningful tasks by giving a big whoop. The wish, the outcome, obstacle, and the plan. And then you want to hack your reticular activating system by making sure that you pay attention to your goals and what you're trying to achieve, but also your strengths, your accomplishments, your good deeds, and what's going well in your life. And finally, you want to make sure that hack time management, it doesn't work for you. Instead, manage your energy. And then once you know how to manage your energy, you can plan. You can plan in an ADD friendly way. So that is that.
Okay.
If you wanted more information, Creative Genius, you can like me and like my page at Creative Genius Coach. I'm not the creative genius. It's my clients that are. So I'm a coach to creative geniuses, or you could sign up for the top 3 productivity hacks for creative geniuses at creativegeniusreport.com. So I'm looking forward to questions now.
Great. Linda, thank you so much. That was great. We have lots of questions, but listeners, please post your questions now. This is your moment. I will start with a question about the Pomodoro method. How does the Pomodoro method work when a 5-minute break could lead you astray from the task? So This is a question about staying on task, which I think is pretty salient for our listeners.
Absolutely. So you use a timer for the task and you use a timer for the break. And after you've taken your break, you can actually decide, do I want to do another Pomodoro on this particular task? But you always have to come back to the task and hopefully that alarm will remind you to do it. You have to have an alarm that's really irritating. And if you've taken the time during that break, that 5-minute break, to look back at what you've achieved, what you've accomplished, the progress that you just made, you're more likely to stay with the task, because now you've just gotten that dopamine hit that, wow, what I'm doing here is worth it.
Okay, great. I think one of the things that troubles people with ADHD commonly and comes up in the questions is how to get started. When a task is before you, you need to get started, and people have a very hard time sort of jumping in. Do you have any suggestions on addressing that?
That is a very common issue. You're totally right. And actually, once you get started, often you're good to go. It's just getting started. So the first thing was that the hack where you make the task smaller. So that will make it easier to get started. So if the task is really small and it takes 15 minutes to do, instead of writing the book, maybe you write the first name, the name of your first chapter, or what you're going to be talking about first, or you do a brainstorm. That is going to be, you're more likely to jump in more easily because it doesn't seem so daunting. But if that doesn't work, you could start with a task that you enjoy doing that's short, but that activates your brain, get your brain stimulated. And as soon as your brain is stimulated, you jump to the next task. The challenge with that is you do need to make it a short task. Don't get into something that's going to keep you. Social media is not a good momentum task, but you could use a task that I call a momentum task that will allow you to, to energize the brain before you jump into the task. And you do that task, once you get started, often you're good to go. If it's a task that's challenging, your energy might wane after a while. If it does, go back to another task that's short and sweet and energizing. And as soon as your brain is awake again, you jump back into the task.
Okay, that sounds great. You mentioned something about creating novelty. And one of the listeners is asking whether you could clarify.
Okay, so creating novelty is just making a task, adding something different to a task. Now, be careful about that, because I'm a strong proponent also of creating systems and routines when there's tasks that need to be redone over and over again. It's much faster to do. It takes less time. However, taking a task that you normally do, I'll give you an example. I had a client who was a professor in university. And one of the challenging things she had to do was to correct assignments. And she really struggled with that. She'd be in her office at home trying to do this, and everything would distract her. So what I had her do was go to a coffee shop and to try there. She went to the coffee shop, and because there's a certain buzz in the room, because it feels more like socializing or something fun that people do, she had no problems getting started. Once she got started, she finished the whole thing. She called me at the end of that. She couldn't believe how fast it had gone and how easily. So creating novelty could be either changing where you do it, how you do it. It could even be changing, I find when I struggle with certain things or I'm not feeling so well and I need to get something done, I find, oddly enough, doing it in bed, because I never ever work in bed, but sitting down and having a nice coffee and doing it in bed is novelty enough for me. So creating that novelty is just changing something. So I don't know if that helps.
Sure, that's great. Yeah. The problem of getting started with great enthusiasm and vigor and a great deal of interest, but then losing interest midway through a task, or maybe even a longer task. How do you keep your interest going when a task is taking, more time than you thought, or it just isn't getting done? How to keep motivated? What one person says: I feel very motivated at the beginning of a project, but it's hard to keep that going.
Absolutely. That's a tendency with a lot of people. The first thing that I would say is break it up into smaller pieces so that you get, and actually I didn't mention that, but one of the things that you get from, or maybe I did, I don't know anymore. When you do a small task, when you make a task shorter, you get a dopamine hit much, much faster. You get to see having completed that little bit, and it tends to give you enough energy to move on to the next to the next phase of that same task. So you could take a task and break it up a little bit so that it's not so long, not so daunting. Instead of a whole day of doing something, you could say, well, for the next hour I'm going to be doing this, or for the next half hour, if that's all you can do of a particular task. You can also use a body double. One thing that I have found that really seems to work well is working with other people around. I had a client who she was a social worker and couldn't write her notes. She had so many of them and she was so far behind. She invited all of the people at work that had some challenges with the same thing, to a conference room on a Friday afternoon so that they could all write their notes. And having everybody there kind of improved her ability to continue. Even when she had a tendency to want to stop, she continued, because having everybody there was kind of empowering her to continue. So small things like this can be one way. I've had some clients who call each other and say, I'm going to be doing this. Yeah, well, I'm going to be doing this. And they might even keep themselves on the phone and do whatever it is that they're doing. And then they come back and say, I got this done. So having an accountability buddy could be another approach. But being very clear on what you want to achieve is another approach. And even better, making sure that you choose the right task to do at the right time. Tasks that require a lot of focus, for example, should never be done outside of your genius zone. It needs to be done at a time when your mental energy is strong, because they require so much of your energy, and trying to do them when you're in the kinetic zone or when you're in recharge zone, it won't take long before you start losing your way. So you want to make sure they're in your agenda, you're clear about what you want and when you do it.
The concept of managing energy as opposed to time is really interesting, and I know you said it's a big topic. But could you give us a few ideas about how to identify what your high energy periods are, and how to allocate your task to those?
Okay, so one way I have for people who take my bigger program, I have a questionnaire that kind of asks a few questions about, when you're not forced to do something, when do you tend to do things? That's one way. Or if you're looking at, okay, if I don't have to go to work most of the time, let's say I know that I'm going to go fishing, I have a day off, I'm going to go fishing, and I love fishing. I don't love fishing, but if I do, what time do I tend to wake up and feel energized and ready to go? When it's really about observation. It's a lot about observation. And I usually tell people the easiest thing to observe is when you're most energetic. Because if you try to do tasks that require, more energy at times when you don't have it, more mental energy when you don't have it, you will not be able to complete that task. So, or you might be able to, but you won't be able to do it for very long. You'll start losing your way and you'll end up jumping on another task because it's too involved mentally. So you might want to determine, and that's one of the things that I will talk about, at the beginning of March when I start that workshop, is how do you go about figuring out when your genius zone is? Recharge tends to be relatively easy to determine. People tend to have a recharge period, a froth in their energy, mental or physical, sometime after lunch, very much in the afternoon. Some people say, I could focus really well in the afternoon, and often that's because you're using adrenaline. You're realizing you haven't gotten anything done, and the pile of to-dos is just piling up and up and up. So that's figuring out what your recharge zones are can help. Figuring out what your genius zone by identifying a task that requires a lot of focus and trying it at different times of the day.
Okay. Here's a great question. It's so simple. It's, why do we procrastinate so much?
And the answer is not simple, because it's different things. It's important to overcome procrastination. It's important to know what is the source of the procrastination. So if I'm trying, I had, years ago, when the economy in the U.S. went south, a lot of my clients are American. I think right now, something like 90% of my clients are American. when the economy went south in 2008, 2010, a lot of my clients, after a while, couldn't continue, and they left. And so I had to get new clients. My website, the person who took care of my website at the time, made a major mistake, and I lost all my referencing. And that's how most people find me, is through my regular website, which is coachlandawalker.com. You couldn't find it on Google anymore. And so I had to talk to people in my area about being available to coach people, local people. And I was scared out of my mind to call these people because I was sure that they would think that I was a this or that. So I had an imposter syndrome. So sometimes it's the fear of being judged, a fear of maybe even being successful. I have a client who his fear is that if he's more successful than he is, he's not going to be able to handle what he has to do because he can't handle what he has to do right now. And he wasn't all that successful when he started. So it could be fear. Sometimes it's because the task is a task that's really playing to your weaknesses. And as much as possible, you want to try to delegate that to somebody else if you can. If not, it could be delegated to a system so you don't have to think so hard about it. Or you might, I've read a couple of years ago, sales rep who couldn't do his sales report. But he's a great sales rep. So he hired his sister, even though he had to pay her out of pocket to do that. Identifying the reason, the main source. The source could be that you don't know where to start. And often if you don't know where to start, it could be that it's not a task, but a project. And you need to break it down into smaller bits. And again, if it's a task that you don't like, that you're not interested in, that's a major, major challenge. You're always going to have some problems with that. You're going to have to redesign the task by injecting interest, novelty, and so on if you can't delegate it to somebody else or to a system. Okay.
Interesting question here about body doubles. I think the question is, any advice for creating a body double? It's kind of a concept, he says, that's lost on other people. So can you describe a little more how an effective body double works and how one might go about looking for a body double?
Okay. So a body double could be another ADHDer that you know. It could be anybody, as long as both people don't talk to each other. They're just there. They're working together. They don't even have to be in the same place. As I mentioned before, you can have a body double over the phone. So that's one thing that you that can help. Some people find you can get a body double that doesn't even know they're your body double. You can actually go, like when I go to a coffee shop, being around, sitting at the table with all of these other people who are studying like I am, that creates a body double. They don't even know their body doubles to me, but because they're there, I tend to stay focused on what I need to do just because they're there. If noise is a problem, then you could go to a library and you sit near a table where there's a lot of people. As long as they're not talking to each other, they can act as a body double, even if you don't know them. So I think the people who will get it the most are ADHDers, other ADHDers. But a spouse can also help, or a friend can also help if you explain that, just for some reason, don't know why, I work best when there's other people around, as long as they don't talk to me while I'm working.
Okay. So we're almost out of time. This has been super interesting. Linda, can you repeat the information about creativegeniusreport.com and what people need to know about your upcoming seminar? Okay, so creativegeniusreport.com is the top 3 productivity hacks for creative genius. It says creative genius entrepreneurs, but even if you're not an entrepreneur, it'll work for you. It's
it's hacks that go a little bit further than what we talked about here. Hacks like creating systems and so on. My workshop, which is going to be in March, it was supposed to be in December, and I kept on putting it off because there's all kinds of stuff going on, is going to be, I think I'm launching March 5th is when it's going to be launched. It'll be announced in my newsletter, and you'll be able to sign up at that time, and you will have access to the first video that explains how to determine when your energy, what your energy patterns are. And then a few days later, you'll be given the opportunity to do the second and so on. And then at the end, a lot of people who take this program, who've taken this free program in the past, have found that it helped them and that was enough for them. Others wanted to go further, so I often will offer the possibility of going further, and I've got a course that goes even more in depth than that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Linda. This was great. Everybody, don't forget to stay on and answer the questions if you're interested in a certificate of attendance. I want to tell you about our next 2 webinars. Next Wednesday, we have Robert Olivardia on marijuana and the ADHD brain, a subject of great interest to a number of people. And then next Tuesday, March 3rd, how to become an executive function detective, solving ADHD problems at school and at home. This one's more for high school students than for adults, but I think anybody interested in executive function would find it helpful. So thanks, everyone, and I wish you a great rest of the day. Goodbye. Thanks, Linda. Appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.